Comrades, the 100th annual conference of this great union. Personally, I've only missed 61 of them. I'd love to know how many Pat's missed. We were having this debate last night around a dinner table. A lot more than me, but you've seen him, how he performs here, 90 next year. You know, let's hope we're all going like he is, number 90. These rostrums, wherever we've had conferences around the country, for those 100 conferences, have supported some great speeches and some great speakers who've delivered some fantastic speeches that have shaped not only our union, but some of the primary legislation in this country. From the abolition of cellar bacon to the maximum exposure limits to flour, from the recognition of baker's asthma as a prescribed industrial disease, to the manifesto pledges on the minimum wage and the abolition of zero-hour contracts. All have started life in our branches and at these rostrums at our annual conference. I could spend the rest of the day telling you stories about things that have happened at our conferences. Some I couldn't tell that have happened at our conference because they would make the papers, and we've got a bad enough reputation already without listing some of them. But they're for another day, maybe in a bar sometime. We could talk about the tub-thumping speeches that we've heard, and we still hear to this day. Speeches from people like the young firebrand over there. I remember him when he was young. Seems a long time ago, but Joe Marino, I remember some of the speeches that he made when he was probably one of the, not the radical, he was more than radical at the time and made some fantastic speeches. But I also remember the fantastic soothing voice of Eric Turner, who was from a late preacher from Nottingham East Midlands district when we had districts. He was a fantastic orator who could hold the audience of conference in his hands, and he was absolutely brilliant. The rousing motions that were moved by people like Brian Griffin, Jonathan Masters, and my great friend and colleague Wally Ormisher, a trio who sadly are no longer with us. There have been stunts pulled at conference as well. There still are some, like the president using license there to give me stick. But there's one I just remember. It was in Bridlington, and Joel remember this. When the miners were on strike, we decided, one of our unemployed members from Liverpool, Gordon Fife, decided he was going to hold a collection. He was going to get up and move a motion to collect money for the miners. And he went up and he gave this speech to conference, and then he held a £1 note up in the air. And he said, I'll put the first £1 in. He let it go, and it went down to the floor. To rapturous applause, except for Wally Ormisher, who was sat on the stage. He went, hang on, you just borrowed that off me to put in the collection.
Well done.
We've had some great comics here, Ricky Tomlinson, Mark Thomas, and we've had some hilarious speeches from renowned figures such as Rodney Bickerstaff, Arthur Scargill, and Dennis Skinner. We've also had the late Tony Benn, who was one of the most fantastic speakers that I've ever heard, and I had the pleasure of sharing a platform with him on many occasions over the years, again, sadly no longer with us. And who can remember when we had Hang Dong Fang? Eh? Hang Dong Fang. You might not know the name, but he spoke at our conference. I'm sure Jerry Corbett will remember. He was the guy who stood in front of the tanks in Tiananmen Square on the students' revolt. He was the person, and we got him to come and speak at our conference. We had, a few years ago, we had two speakers, one from Palestine and one from Israel, because we never do one-sided arguments. And these two people came to our conference and remained lifelong friends. In fact, the guy from Israel invited the guy from Palestine to his daughter's wedding, and I know that that is still a friendship that exists today. And of course, yesterday, we had the next Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn, delivering a message of hope for this year. Our delegates over the years have had a reputation for working hard to deliver change where it is needed, and of course, some of you have the reputation of playing hard. National President heard about the wine lake and said, well, he's going to make sure there's never going to be a vodka lake.
Absolutely.
I see Roy Streeter and Kenny at the back there, smiling. Eh? Laughing, but we could have had drowned in a sea of lager if it hadn't been for those two. Some who thought the advert proclaiming "Drink Canada Dry" was a challenge have found their way to this conference. Starting off in Southport. We've seen love bloom at our conference. Jeff and Madeline McCarthy, I remember them meeting at our annual conference and getting together, and now they're happily, well, they're married. Now they're married, and now and again they talk to each other. But that started at the annual conference of the Bakers Union. And no doubt conferences have been blamed for some relationship breakups as well. It's like, we can't blame the Labour Party, let's blame the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union for it. The irony, comrades, is that what happens now probably happened back in the first conference that we held in Birmingham in 1910. Is that right, Pat? We're still campaigning on many of the issues that plagued the bacon industry back in 1847 when this great union was founded. Low pay, poor working conditions, shifts that are too long or not long enough, pensions that don't give pensioners enough to live on after a life of drudgery, and of course, health and safety issues that haven't changed. Health and safety issues that we campaign on, and if it wasn't for the great work that health and safety reps do, we would never, ever have improved them. The big change to our conference is the amount of speakers we have. I don't remember any motion being formally seconded in the past, and very rarely listened to a debate that didn't have a snake of delegates around the hall wanting to be part of that debate. You found at the end of the conferences that very often we didn't finish the agenda, and motions had to be sent back then to the Executive Council. The face of trade unionism, comrades, is changing in this country. And it's not always for the better. Last week, Francis O'Grady talked about numbers which have plummeted from 13 million plus to around 6 million in the space of 40 years. Comrades, we need to arrest this decline, or we'll find that not only will we have small unions disappearing into big unions, but the bigger ones will be questioned as to their existence and their relevance. I accept that we can't stop closures, and I accept that we can't stop some rationalisation. But we can do something about the 24 million people who aren't in trade unions, and we can go back from here and we can start campaigning to get those people in and boost that number back. Let's get back to 13 million. There's no reason why we can't get back to 20 and 25 and 30 million. I hear people talking in the press saying we don't want to return to things like the winter of discontent, when rubbish piled up on the streets and we didn't bury our dead and the unions got blamed for that. There's nothing mystical about this, you know. It was called the winter of discontent because we were discontent. With everything that was happening in this country, workers had the right to be discontent and the right to put pressure on a government of whatever colour it is. And at that time, the Labour Party under Callaghan was playing with capitalism, and it brought down that government eventually. The sad part of that is that we ended up with Thatcher. We ended up with her as a Prime Minister, and look where we went. She started off giving the biggest pay rises, because we had inflation, the biggest pay rises that workers in this country had seen for years. But by God, we paid for it afterwards, and we're still paying for the legacy of that woman. She brought in the start of what we call the me, my, mine culture. When you could buy your council house without thinking about what the legacy was for the future, about whether young people, even your own children, whether they would have a house. And they stopped the councils. Like Liverpool Council, they stopped them, they rate capped them, they stopped them using the capital assets to build new houses. Because if they'd allowed that, we wouldn't have the problems we've got here. Affordable housing that people can go out and buy. She sold off our nationalised industries, and people fell for the con. They bought shares because the shares were cheap. That was what we were going to do. And people went off on an exotic holiday to Skegness after they sold them to the barons who now run our industries. And you can see, when they say privatisation works, privatisation only works for those who are at the top, who've got the money. It's never ever worked for you. No privatisation, because if it isn't trains running late or whatever, or not running at all, it is you're paying more for your bills. That's the reality of what Thatcher did under nationalisation. So I put it to you, rather than marching through the streets of London every now and again, once or twice a year, as a show of strength, we wave our flags, we sing songs. Absolutely fantastic. It's a great, colourful day. I put it to Francis one time, it's like Kim Jong-un's birthday in Korea. He has his birthday, and all the missiles come out, and the tanks, and all the marches, and all the people have got flags, and they're all happy, and they're smiling. And the day after, the missiles and all that get parked back in the garage, the streets are opened again, and the people are back with a life of poverty. And that's exactly what's happening here. Marches aren't going to change anything. It's a show of strength by up to 1 million people sometimes. We need more to happen in the workplace. We need more protective legislation. We've had enough, and we need to build for the future. But it means that we have to start that fight back. If we want inspiration, look no further than the brave McDonald's workers, what they did. Okay, a small number. I don't care what the companies say about it. Workers who took on the second biggest employer in the world, and probably, in my opinion, but I'm sure lots of other people share this opinion, the biggest exploiter of workers' rights in the world. They don't care whether you've got no money. As long as Pomeroy's earning this $5,300 an hour, you don't come into the equation. All you are is a means to a profit. But you took the stand, and I am so, so proud of you. And I'm pleased that I stood on the picket lines with you and spoke at your rallies. The President made reference yesterday. They didn't achieve everything, but I'll tell you what a difference that first strike, September the 1st, made. And the journeys that we've had to Europe, to the European Parliament. It's made differences for people we're starting to get rid of a bullying culture. You got the biggest pay rise in living memory within those stores. And of course, they now say they're going to look at the 0-hour contracts. Whether or not that'll mean, instead of that, they'll give you a 1-hour contract or a 2-hour contract is yet to be seen. I suspect that may well be the way. And like the Hovis workers in this country, when they had their dispute, they were an inspiration, not just to our own union, but to the nation. It was something that captured the imagination. They enthused an army of workers. They woke up a sleeping giant, and that's what the trade union's been. They woke up a sleeping giant. And when legislation says you can only have 6 pickets on a picket line, well, I attended a Hovis rally one time, a picket line outside, with 400 people there. And that's the same. We've had massive picket lines at other strikes we've had because this union is prepared to fight for its workers. I hope that Jeremy Corbyn, and I'm sure he will, and Paul Novak, who's at the back of the hall, will take back our message of hope and start to build towards full trade union membership in this country and fair rights for all workers. Solidarity, comrades.